A new study finds that depression hits your finances harder than cancer or stroke, and the damage can last decades. Marriage may actually lower your risk of getting cancer, and the gap is bigger than anyone would have ever expected. And there's a name for why you're buying a $22 smoothie, even though you feel terrible about the economy. And it turns out you're not alone and you're not irrational. While everyone was busy arguing politics today, a bunch of other things happened. Some of them matter, some of them are deeply weird. I'm not saying the political stuff doesn't matter, but there are 36 million podcasts out there, 29 million of which I produce, and we can't all be doing the same content. So I'm giving you a break from all that stuff. I'm Keith Conrad, and this is News SideQuest. A new study published in JAMA Health Forum followed nearly 5 million people in Denmark for over a decade and compared the long-term financial impact of 4 different diagnoses: depression, alcohol use disorder, stroke, and breast cancer. The finding that made news is stark. Income is around 10% lower 10 years after a depression diagnosis compared with people without depression. And the gap does not disappear. The income loss for depression is greater than for some physical illnesses such as stroke and breast cancer. When the data was broken down by gender, losses for men totaled over 13% for depression, 10% for alcohol use, and 4% for stroke. For women, losses were 10% for depression compared to 2% for stroke and less than 1% for breast cancer a decade out. There's also a detail in this study that I find particularly revealing. Income begins to decline in the years before people receive a formal depression diagnosis. The consequences for working life emerge gradually before anyone has put a name on what's actually happening to them. So by the time anyone is actually in treatment for depression, they may have already been losing ground financially for months or even years. Now, from a purely practical standpoint, that actually makes some sense. If you're dealing with a physical illness like cancer, you're obviously impaired, but the illness actually has a name. People understand it, workplaces accommodate it to some degree, and once you're in remission, life can resume more or less as normal. Depression doesn't work that cleanly. It affects your productivity while you're still showing up to work. It impairs decision-making in ways that are invisible to the people around you. It changes your relationship to money in ways that compound over time. The things people try to feel better, therapy, medication, new hobbies, lifestyle changes, they all cost money, and an untreated depression costs even more. I'm not going to pretend this is a comfortable topic, but I think it's worth talking about directly because the financial dimension of mental illness is something people rarely name out loud, and the silence around it is part of why the spiral gets so deep before anyone actually notices.
Now that's a bit of a problem.
A new study published in the journal Cancer Research Communications, I read it every month, looked at cancer rates across different marital statuses, and the numbers are striking. Among never married men, cancer rates are 60% higher than those who have been married, a group that includes divorced and widowed. For women who have never married, the incidence is even higher at 83%. The second number is the one that jumped out at me. Research on marriage generally suggests men benefit more from it health-wise than women do. This study flips that completely, at least when it comes to cancer. For older adults in the study, the correlation strengthened, suggesting the effect of marriage accumulates over time. More reason to stay together, I guess. Now, I want to be careful about what this actually means because the study's authors are careful about it too. The finding almost certainly reflects multiple causes layered on top of each other. People who have been married are less likely to engage in risky behaviors like smoking and excessive drinking, which are strongly linked to lung cancer and cervical cancer. They're also more likely to engage in screening and prevention. If you're unmarried and more isolated, you're less likely to catch something early. When was the last time you saw a single dude go to a doctor? There's also a critique worth taking seriously. One researcher who spent years writing about cancer and marital status argues that the benefits often reflect systems that reward marriage rather than marriage itself. Things like health insurance plans that extend coverage to spouses but not to others, or doctors who assume single patients have less social support and therefore offer them less aggressive treatment. The researcher was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer as an unmarried woman and described a doctor who was absolutely immovably convinced that she couldn't handle aggressive treatment and who interrupted her when she tried to explain her support network. So the honest answer to why does marriage lower cancer risk is probably it's the connection, the accountability, the social support, and the access to healthcare, not the legal paperwork. Which means the question isn't really about marriage, it's about what marriage often provides and whether you have that regardless. That's what I want you to think about. Who's your person, married or not, who would notice if something about you seemed off and would nag you about getting that thing checked out? And do you even have that in your life?
Ugh, I can actually hear you getting fatter.
The Conversation published a piece this week asking why Americans are buying $22 smoothies while simultaneously reporting some of the worst consumer confidence numbers in years. And the answer, it turns out, is psychologically pretty interesting. There's a concept called the lipstick index, coined after the September 11th attacks, when Estee Lauder's chairman noticed that lipstick sales actually went up. The theory is that when big luxuries feel completely out of reach, people shift their spending to smaller ones. You can't buy a house, you can't buy a car, you're watching gas prices eat up all of your paycheck, but you can go get a smoothie. And that purchase, small as it is, gives you something that's been stripped away by everything else. A moment of control over your experience. Consumer psychologists call this compensatory consumption, buying things that feel in control when life feels out of control. But what's interesting about the $22 smoothie specifically is it's not just a treat. Today's premium food purchases carry an extra layer. This particular smoothie isn't just indulgent, it's organic, superfood enriched, wellness aligned, whatever those things mean. This virtue coding transforms indulgence into self-investment. You're not splurging during a downturn, you're doing something for your health. You're not being frivolous, you're supporting a small business, which is honestly a pretty elegant psychological trick. You get the comfort of the treat and the permission structure that says it wasn't actually frivolous. No wonder it works. At some point, when you can't afford a car or a house or basically anything, you might as well buy something that makes you happy. With the caveat that things that make you happy don't all have to cost $22. Also, if you buy that thing that makes you happy every day, you're probably going to be worse off. So what's your version of the $22 smoothie, the thing you buy or do that doesn't make strict financial sense, but is the one treat you hold on to no matter what because it's yours? Could be literal food, could be something else entirely.
I apologize for nothing.
A Nutella jar floated through the Artemis 2 spacecraft on camera and became the best free advertisement in the history of space exploration. For context, NASA apparently once had special M&Ms made without the M's on them, so the space shuttle crew could eat them without doing an actual endorsement. Someone has clearly loosened the rules at NASA. I'll say this, if a floating jar of Nutella past a camera helps NASA's public image, well, 4 astronauts are on the way home from the moon, I'm completely fine with that.
Brought to you by Carl's Jr.
Why do you keep saying that?
Because they pay me every time I do.
Eligible young men will be automatically registered for the Selective Service military draft later this year under a new federal policy that removes the opt-in requirement. Whether or not you have feelings about the draft itself, the observation is obvious. If we can auto-register 18-year-olds for the military, we should be able to auto-register voters. It's not a political statement, that's just noticing that the infrastructure clearly exists.
There's no obligation. Unless, of course, war were declared.
What's that?
War were declared.
A tiny Australian town has hit the market for $400,000. That's the entire town, buildings, land, presumably the whole situation. For context, that's roughly the median price of a single-family home in the United States right now. I'm not saying anyone should do this. I'm saying someone should at least have the conversation.
That's a thought.
A Wisconsin couple is being sued by their landlord after they posted a negative online review about fees. Online reviews are inherently subjective. How you feel about something is not a factual claim. This seems like a lawsuit that's going to teach the landlord an expensive lesson about both the First Amendment and the Streisand effect.
Rest assured that I was on the internet within minutes, registering my disgust throughout the world.
A pastor in Georgia has been charged after a man drowned during baptism. It's obviously a tragedy, first and foremost, but as a purely observational matter, the Catholic Church switched to sprinkling for a reason.
Yipes.
A Harvard study finds that staying positive may help keep dementia at bay, which is great news, except I genuinely can't remember the last time I felt optimistic about anything. Although, wait, that might be a concern.
Oh, okay, that helps. Really? No.
A man has inherited 500 vintage lawnmowers from his father and describes himself as now being spoiled for choice when it comes time to cut the grass. 500. It's not a collection, that's a commitment. I respect it enormously and have several questions.
I don't know whether to congratulate you or not.
I wouldn't.
Humans are apparently losing the fight against flying Asian carp, which have been jumping out of the water and injuring boaters in the Midwest for years. I didn't know we were in a war with flying fish. At this point, between the Iran conflict, the tariff situation, the housing crisis, and now airborne carp, I completely understand why the Artemis crew chose to spend 10 days flying around the moon.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
And that's the news side quest for today. Got some genuine questions out there: the financial cost of depression, who's in your corner when it matters, and what your $22 smoothie actually is. Send your thoughts to newssidequest@gmail.com or leave them in the comments on Substack. See you tomorrow.